Bats about bats. We met Dory on a warm September night, the week before school started. My best friend Liz and I were on our way to my house for a sleepover. As we reached the front door, Liz grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that, Suzanne?" she asked. I shook my head. "No." "Listen," Liz insisted. I stopped and listened. This time, I heard it too. A soft flapping noise. Then I glanced up and saw it, something big and black soaring toward my head. "Ew," I yelled. "It's a bat," Liz cried. "Run!" Liz and I charged for my front door. The bat swooped down at us, circling us. "It's after us," Liz screamed. She threw her hands over her head. The bat dived at Liz. Then it swooped low for me. "Get away," I screamed. I waved my arms wildly. I felt the bat's wings scrape across my cheek. With a cry, I threw myself on the grass, face down. "The bat is gone," Liz said, leaning over me, her freckled face filled with concern. "You can get up." I rolled over and saw the girl, standing next to Liz. She had pale skin, light blue eyes, and long blonde hair. "Hi," the stranger said. "Are you all right?" Sure. Where's the bat? Where's the vampire?" I asked, rubbing my cheek. The new girl laughed. A musical, tinkly laugh. "There's no such thing as vampires," she said. "There is a vampire bat, though. It lives in South America, and it does drink blood." "Oh no," Liz shrieked. "It's back!" She pointed at the bat soaring above our heads. The girl squinted at the creature. "That's just a brown bat," she said. "A very pretty one." "Pretty!" I exclaimed. "Yeah," Liz said. "Pretty ugly." The new girl's name was Dory Morrow. She told us the family had just moved into the neighbourhood. "How come you know so much about bats?" Liz asked her. "I've always been interested in them," Dory replied. "My parents are bat scientists." She glanced up, scanning the sky for the bat. "Well, I hate them," I said. "Bats are creepy." I invited Dory into my house. She stayed for a while, and we got to know her a little bit better. Liz and I really liked her. After that night, Liz and Dory and I began hanging out together. We played softball and we rode our bikes. We watched videos. We shopped at the mall together. Everything would have been perfect, except one thing. Dory was bats about bats. It was all she could ever talk about. One day after school, Dory invited Liz and me to her house. We couldn't believe her bedroom. The walls were plastered with pictures of bats. A big bat poster hung over her bed. Toy bats lined her bookshelf. A big stuffed teddy bat sat on her pillow. "Gross," Liz cried. "Bats aren't gross," Dory replied calmly. "In fact, they're very clean animals. They clean themselves just like cats." "Ew," I cried. "What's that?" "That is a bat skeleton," Dory answered. She picked up a clear plastic box with a tiny bat skeleton inside. Dory tried to hand the box to me, but I backed away. "I'm going to be a bat scientist someday," Dory said, placing the box on her desk, "just like my parents." I nodded. "Bats are very helpful to the environment," Dory went on. "Did you know that a single bat can catch 600 mosquitoes in 1 hour? Who cares?" Liz replied. "They're still disgusting." "Some bats even pollinate flowers," Dory ignored Liz. "Dory, can we stop talking about bats?" I shouted. "I hate bats. Just talking about them makes my skin crawl." Dory shrugged. "I really don't understand it," she said. "How can anyone hate bats?" "How can anyone not hate bats?" Liz said to me on our way home. "I don't know," I said, "but I wish Dory would stop talking so much about them." "Maybe she does it because she wants to scare us," Liz suggested. "I don't think so," I replied. "I really think she likes them. She thinks they're cute, but they just make me think of vampires. I bet if she met a vampire, she'd probably think he was cute too." Liz was silent for a moment. Then she grinned. "Maybe, maybe not," she said. "Why don't we find out?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well," Liz started, "what if we invited her to a sleepover and a vampire showed up?" "That would be great," I giggled. "Too bad we don't have Dracula's phone number." "We don't need it," Liz said. "We have my brother's Halloween costume from last year. A really cool vampire costume." We had a perfect plan. Liz promised her big brother Mike should never listen in on his phone calls again. In return, Mike agreed to play vampire. Now, all we had to do was invite Dory to the sleepover. At first, Dory didn't want to come. She didn't like sleepovers, but we bribed her. Next to bats, the thing Dory liked best in the world was anchovy pizza. Mum is going to order anchovy pizza, Liz promised. We'll rent videos. We'll have a great time. Why don't I just come over for the pizza and the videos, Dory asked. My mum won't mind picking me up late. No way, Liz said. You have to stay for the sleepover. Well, all right, Dory gave in. The sleepover was on for that night. From the minute Dory showed up, it was hard for me and Liz to act normal. We couldn't wait to see Dory's face when Liz's brother went into his vampire act. We ate the pizza, then we watched the video. It was about a vampire who attacks a bunch of kids at summer camp. Really terrifying. Cool movie, Dory said when it ended. It was cool, I agreed, and scary. I didn't think it was scary, Dory declared. Then why were you hiding your eyes, I asked. I wasn't hiding them, Dory protested. I was just rubbing them. We argued for a while about whether Dory had been rubbing her eyes or not. Then Liz yawned. I'm sleepy, she said. Let's go to bed. There was no way I was going to fall asleep and miss the chance to see Dory get scared by a vampire. Except the next thing I knew, I did fall asleep, and the next thing I knew after that, an icy hand gripped my neck. My eyes flew open, a pale face hovered over me, with long fangs and blood dripping from its lips. Not Suzanne, Liz whispered. Wrong girl. Mike loosened his grip on my throat. He tiptoed over to Dory. She laid curled up in her sleeping bag, snoring gently. Mike slipped his hands around her neck. He lowered his head as if he was really going to bite her neck. Dory's eyes popped open. She let out a high-pitched shriek. Be still, my little one, Mike said with a terrible accent. Let me go! Dory broke free of his grasp and ran out of the room. Liz and I laughed so hard our sides ached. We took off after her and caught her downstairs, halfway out the door. It's okay, Dory, Liz called. It was just a joke. It was my brother, Mike, dressed up as Dracula. Dory stopped in the doorway. How could you do that to me? She wailed. I thought you were my friends. It was just a joke, Liz said. We wanted to convince you that bats really are scary. Right, I chimed in. You've got to admit it. You were scared. Dory glanced at me. I'm not admitting to anything. Some friends you are. She stomped back upstairs, collected her clothes, then stormed out of the house. Liz and I chased after her. Dory, wait, I called down the street, but she didn't turn back. Liz and I went back inside. Suddenly, the joke didn't seem so funny anymore. Do you think Dory will ever speak to us again? I asked. It was just a joke, Liz replied. She'll get over it. It turned out that Liz was right. Dory called me the very next day. Sorry I got so freaked out last night, she said. You're not angry at us? I asked. No, she replied. It was just a joke. A good one too. It really worked. You're really not angry at us. I couldn't believe Dory would forgive us so easily. No, in fact, I'd like you to come to my house for a sleepover. How about next week on Halloween? After we go trick-or-treating. Liz and I both figured Dory was up to something. We were sure she was going to try and get even, but we were ready for whatever she had planned. At least we thought so. Halloween night was dry and cool. The full moon lit up the dark, leafless trees with an eerie light. I dressed as a gypsy with lots of gold jewellery and a long, flowing red skirt. Liz went as a clown. She wore gobs of clown makeup, including a big red nose, and she tied balloons to her sneakers. We didn't have to wonder what Dory's costume would be. When we rang her doorbell, a huge bat opened the door. Dory, Liz and I shrieked. Great costume. Even though we hate bats, we have to admit that Dory's costume was awesome. She wore black from head to toe with big black bat wings sprouting from her shoulders. Everyone in the neighbourhood loved our costumes, especially Dory's. By the end of the night, our trick-or-treat bags weighed a ton. We could hardly carry them. Yum, Liz said, sitting cross-legged on Dory's bed. She stuffed an entire candy bar into her mouth. I'll be right back. In a minute. Dory headed to the door. I promised I'd give some of my candy to my brother. Your brother? I said. I didn't know you had a brother. He stays in his room a lot, Dory replied. She disappeared down the hall with a bag of candy. While we waited for Dory to return, we began sorting our loot into piles. Chocolate, hard candies, taffy, and non-candy. Did you hear that? Liz asked, lifting her head up and listening. Hear what? That! She gave a little shriek and pointed at the open window, where a huge brown bat swooped inside. "Run!" Liz screamed. We leaped off the bed. Liz started for the door, but before she could reach it, the bat streaked into her hair. "Help!" Liz screamed, pulling at her hair. "Get it out!" My pulse raced. I couldn't touch that thing. I couldn't, but I had to. I had to help Liz. The bat beat its wings against Liz's head. It wound its sharp claws around her long red hair. I reached out fast, grabbed one of its wings and yanked it hard. The creature jerked its head around. It stared at me with its tiny black eyes. Then it dug its claws into my hand and wouldn't let go. "Help me," I cried, shaking my fist frantically. The bat clung tightly, digging deeper into my skin. "Liz, do something." She did. She screamed. She stood there, screaming. "Get Dory," I yelled. "Hurry!" I whipped my arm back and forth to loosen the bat, but it only gripped me tighter. "Stop it!" Dory ran into the room, shouting. "Stop it, right now!" The bat opened its pointy snout to bite me. I swung my arm and smacked it hard against the wall. "Stop it!" Dory repeated, her face twisted in anger. "You'll hurt it." "Are you crazy?" I screamed, getting ready to swing again. Dory rushed over and pulled the bat off my fingers. The creature clung to her hand, practically cooing. I stared at my raw skin. The bat attacked us, Dory. It flew into Liz's hair and it clawed me. "Who can blame it?" Dory said. "You terrified it, the poor little thing." I watched in disgust as Dory let the bat crawl up her arm. She smiled. The bat nuzzled her cheek. "It's only a brown bat," she said, with a strange smile. "Come with me. I'll put it in the basement." I didn't want to go with Dory. I wanted to go home, but I was afraid to leave, to go outside where more bats might be waiting. So Liz and I followed Dory to the basement. She unlocked the basement door and started down the steps. At the bottom, we saw another door. A dim red light shone underneath it. Dory swung the door open. It was almost totally dark inside. I squinted into the deep red glow. I saw 2 long tables crowded with cages and beakers and test tubes. A laboratory. This is Dory's parents' lab, I realized. This is where they must work. Liz tugged on my sleeve. "What?" I asked, staring at the beaker that bubbled over with a strange yellow liquid. Liz didn't reply. She tugged again. She stared across the room, her gaze frozen on something. I followed her stare and gasped. 2 creatures stood hunched over a small table in the corner of the room. 2 creatures as tall as humans, with large black ears and huge wings sprouting from their shoulders. 2 human-sized bats. Liz and I screamed. We whirled around and charged up the stairs. We ran from the house as fast as we could, but we heard a fluttering behind us, close behind us. We turned to see Dory changing into a bat, sprouting coarse black hair, leathery wings, sharp fangs. I let out a shriek. Dory's bat face twisted into a smile. "Hey, don't be scared," she squeaked. "I told you I was going to be a scientist, remember? A bat scientist? Just like my parents." Just kidding, guys. It's just me. Hey, look, if you are after more chills, thrills, and... did I mention chills? Please subscribe to the Leftovers channel. I'll be doing a whole bunch more super spooky material, especially the Goosebumps book reading. I've tracked down every single one of those 10 tales to give you goosebumps, and I will be reading each story. So subscribe, hit that little bell icon so you can keep getting notified. You know how the system works. And yeah, tune in next time for some more Leftovers from the Leftover Culture Review.